He said it with the kind of smile people use when they want cruelty to sound practical. We've decided to go in a more cost-effective direction. I was still standing in his office doorway, holding the quarterly report I had stayed up finishing when I understood what that meant. Not restructuring, not reassignment, replacement. After 12 years, Victor Lang leaned back in his chair like a man who had already moved on. He did not thank me. He had the calm ease of someone who has rehearsed a difficult message until it no longer feels difficult. I've already hired your replacement, he said. And then, almost proudly, she costs about half your salary. Half. 12 years of building client relationships, fixing systems that were broken before I got there, handling every crisis before it reached his inbox. 12 years of being the person everyone called when the work actually mattered. Reduced to a salary line that didn't fit his new budget. I looked at him. I kept my face completely still. Then I said, I see. And nothing else, because there was nothing else worth saying in that room to that man. The decision had been made. The meeting was a formality dressed up as a conversation. The real work of what came next had already begun. The HR representative had been brought in to make it look official. She sat to Victor's left with a folder on her lap and the face of someone who has delivered these meetings often enough to know the best thing she can do is get through it efficiently. Victor slid a severance packet across his desk. Your last day will be this Friday, he said. We'd appreciate your help with transition materials between now and then. That was Tuesday. 4 days. 4 days to hand over 12 years of institutional knowledge, client relationships, and operational procedures. The severance number was on the second page. It was not nothing, but it was also not 12 years. I signed where they asked me to sign. I said the appropriate professional things. Then I walked back to my desk, sat in my chair, and looked at my screen while the particular stillness that follows a shock settled over me. Then I opened a blank document and started typing. Because if I only had 4 days, I was going to use every hour doing what I had always done. Making sure that the people who came after me had what they needed, whether they deserved that consideration or not. It was not for Victor. It was because the work had always mattered to me. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out on Friday, let me tell you who I am. My name is Danielle Mercer. I have spent most of my career in operations management. The part of any company that is least glamorous and most necessary, where the gap between what leadership promises and what the organization can deliver gets quietly bridged every day. My boss replaced me with someone cheaper after 12 years, 1 week later the company. I am not flashy. I did not go to the same schools as Victor Lang. I built my professional reputation by showing up, knowing my work thoroughly, and being reliable in ways that compounded over time into something real. What I did not fully understand, until the moment Victor slid that packet across his desk, was how completely my employer had stopped seeing the difference between the cost of my presence and the value of it. He had been running a calculation for months. On his spreadsheet, I was expensive. The replacement, a 24-year-old named Petra who had been at the company 8 months, was not. On paper, the math looked obvious. In practice, the math was about to become very complicated. 12 years ago I joined the company during what anyone there at the time would describe as a difficult period. The department handled client accounts for a mid-sized professional services firm. When I arrived, client satisfaction scores were near their lowest recorded level. 3 account managers had quit in 5 months. 2 major clients had reduced their contracts after delivery failures. I was hired as a senior account coordinator. A decent title with a job description that had very little to do with what the role actually required. In my first week I read everything. Client files, email threads, complaint logs, project records. I was building a picture of the actual system, where the bottlenecks were, where handoffs broke down, where good intentions met operational reality and lost. By the end of my second week I had a list of 12 specific problems. By the end of my second month I had fixed 7 of them. Nobody told me to do this. Nobody assigned it to me. I did it because the problems were there and I could see them, and seeing problems clearly without addressing them felt like professional dishonesty. 12 more years of that same feeling. Nobody ever quite credited me for it in the way credit is supposed to work. But the work was real, and its absence would eventually be real too. The strange quality of being good at operational work is that your success makes itself invisible. When things run badly, everyone can see it. Clients complain. Deadlines slip. Emails escalate. Problems announce themselves loudly. When things run well, they simply run. Quietly. Without drama. Without the visible crisis that draws recognition toward the person managing it. I spent 12 years becoming very good at making things run quietly. Client satisfaction scores recovered within my first 2 years. The department stopped losing account managers because I had built structures that made their jobs manageable. 2 clients who had reduced contracts renewed at higher levels after 12 months of consistent delivery. My boss at the time, not Victor, told me during one review that I had stabilized the department. He meant it as a compliment. What I heard, with the perspective I have now, was the word that would eventually be used to justify replacing me. Stable, predictable, functioning. When something is stable and functioning, it is easy to believe it will remain so without the person who made it that way. That belief is always a mistake. It just takes time to reveal itself. Victor Lang became department director 3 years before he replaced me. He arrived from a different division where he had built a reputation for cutting costs and generating short-term margin improvements. His promotion was presented as exciting, fresh leadership, new energy, strategic vision. In practical terms, he had an excellent sense of what looked good on a quarterly report and a very limited understanding of why the department's operations worked the way they did. In his first month, he called me in to explain existing processes. He nodded and used words like legacy and complexity in ways that suggested he was filing the information under things to simplify rather than things that exist for a reason. He was not entirely wrong. Every system accumulates habits that outlive their purpose. Victor could not tell the difference between processes that existed out of habit and processes that were the only thing preventing specific failures. To him, all of it looked like overhead. And overhead, in his framework, was the enemy. I tried to explain the distinction in every format I could think of. Reports, meetings, memos. None of it changed how he saw the numbers. He was already building something. I just didn't know yet exactly what. The question Victor asked me that I remember most clearly came about 18 months after he arrived. Why do we maintain such detailed records on individual client preferences? He was looking at a client management file I had built as though it were unnecessarily complicated. I explained, when a client account changes hands, which happens when account managers leave or get promoted, the detailed records allow the transition to happen without the client experiencing a service drop. Without them, new managers spend months rediscovering information their predecessors already knew, and clients become frustrated enough to question the relationship. Victor listened. He said, "How often do accounts actually change hands?" I told him, "More often than he might expect." He said, "That seems worth modeling." I spent 2 weeks building the model. He reviewed it, thanked me, and made no operational changes. What changed was how he looked at my salary on the spreadsheet. I noticed it, not immediately, but within weeks. The way budget discussions began to include my department in a different tone. The way certain conversations shifted. I started doing what I had always done when I sensed a developing problem. I paid closer attention and started keeping more careful records. I just did not yet know exactly what those records were going to be used for, or how soon. The signs that I was becoming a target were visible if you knew how to read them. The first was when Victor began meeting with junior team members without informing me. There are legitimate reasons for a director to speak directly with staff. But the pattern, meetings without my knowledge followed by changes to processes I managed without my input, told me what he was working toward. The second was when he began reassigning credit. A client would compliment a deliverable I had designed. Victor would respond praising the team in ways that highlighted junior staff, technically not inaccurate but subtly erasing the senior layer of work that had made their contributions possible. The third sign was Petra. She joined 8 months before I was let go, introduced as a high-potential addition. She was 24, enthusiastic, and talented in the way people are talented before experience has shown them the limits of their talent. She cost significantly less than I did. I want to be careful here. Petra was not the villain. She was a young professional put into a position she wasn't ready for by a boss more interested in her salary than her success. She worked hard. What she lacked was not ambition, it was 12 years of accumulated operational knowledge that no transition document can fully transfer. Victor did not understand this. He was about to. In the months before Victor replaced me, I watched him shift more of my responsibilities toward Petra. Not all at once, that would have required an explanation. Project by project, meeting by meeting, the work I had done drifted in her direction. She asked good questions. I answered them honestly, because the clients and projects deserved that even when the organizational politics around them did not. But there is a difference between answering specific questions and having the patterned understanding that lets you anticipate problems before they surface. That understanding lives in experience. It is not transferable in the time between someone's last day and their replacement's first week. Victor understood that Petra's salary was lower than mine. He understood that she appeared capable in meetings. He understood that the quarterly margin would improve if he made the change before the next reporting period. What he did not understand was what I was actually doing every day. Not the tasks in my job description. The work underneath those tasks. The pattern recognition. The relationship maintenance. The 1,000 small decisions that never appeared in any report but were the difference between the department functioning and failing. He was about to receive a very thorough education on the subject. At significant cost to himself and to the company he thought he was improving. When Victor told me I was being replaced, I had been quietly preparing for the possibility for months. Not because I was planning to leave, but because the signs had accumulated long enough that some part of me had been organizing, the way you pack an emergency bag, not because you expect a disaster but because preparation is a form of respect for reality. I had been keeping personal copies of key documentation. Client histories, project timelines, operational procedures I had designed, backed up in formats I could access after my company email was deactivated. Not proprietary data I wasn't entitled to retain, but documentation of my own work and thinking. I had also been maintaining my professional network more deliberately. Calls returned promptly. Former colleagues kept warm. None of this was revenge. It was the professional discipline of someone who understood that no job is permanent and that the time to maintain external relationships is before you need them. When Victor told me Friday was my last day, I was genuinely sad. I was also, quietly, ready. I had one more thing to do before I left. Not for Victor. Because the work had always mattered to me, and I refused to let it end without giving whoever came after the best possible chance. Even if that person was Petra, inheriting more than she understood. I spent my last 4 days documenting everything as thoroughly and honestly as I could. Not because Victor deserved it. He did not. But because the clients deserved it. Because Petra was about to step into a role she was underprepared for through no fault of her own. And because I had built those systems and took professional pride in them that had nothing to do with whether the person asking me to leave was being fair. Client by client, process by process, I created transition files. I noted which clients needed earlier outreach before renewals, and where official delivery timelines required buffer days. I documented the informal agreements with other departments that had never been formally written down but functioned as load-bearing walls in several key operational relationships. I delivered everything to Victor's shared drive Thursday afternoon with a summary email explaining what it contained. He replied, "Thanks. Team will review." I read that and understood that nobody was going to review them. But I had done my part. My conscience was clear. Whatever happened next, and I had a reasonable idea of what was coming, it would not happen because I had left people without the information they needed. I had given them everything. What happened now was up to them. My last day was a Friday. I arrived at the usual time. I worked through the morning methodically, the way I had worked through 10,000 mornings in that building. I answered emails. I tied up 2 open items that would have caused problems the following week if left unresolved. At noon I packed my desk. It did not take long. A plant I had been tending for 6 years. A few books. A photo of my daughter at her middle school graduation. Victor came by once. He stood at the edge of my desk and said something about the team being sorry to see me go and how much they appreciated my contributions. He used words like tremendous and foundational. I thanked him. I shook his hand. I looked at him in the way you look at someone when you know exactly what they are doing and have decided to be better than the occasion invites you to be. Then I walked out, held my head straight, did not look back. The front door closed behind me. The parking lot was ordinary. The drive home was the same drive I had made 12,000 times before. This time, I would not make it again. That chapter was finished. What happened now was up to the system I was leaving behind. The first sign something was going wrong arrived 3 days after I left. A client named Hugh Bellamy, who had been working with our department on a contract renewal for 4 months, accidentally sent an email to my old address. Muscle memory is stronger than address book updates when you have been emailing someone for 6 years. Hugh was confused about a pricing document that did not match the preliminary figures we had discussed. The document Petra had sent was based on the standard rate card. What Hugh needed was the adjusted rate reflecting a volume commitment his company had made 2 years earlier, documented in a file, described in my transition documentation, apparently not reviewed. I forwarded his email to Petra with a brief note explaining the situation and pointing her to the correct file. I did not contact Hugh directly. It was not my account anymore. I closed my laptop and noticed, with something between sadness and inevitability, that this was not going to be the last time something like this happened. The information existed. The file was there. The location was described in the transition summary Victor had dismissed in 5 words. The problem was not that the information was unavailable. You need experience to know what information you are missing. Petra did not yet have enough experience to know what she didn't know. That gap was going to keep widening. The second situation arrived 6 days after my last day. Rosario Figueiredo, operations lead at one of our larger accounts, reached out through LinkedIn. She understood I had left and was not asking me to do anything inappropriate. She wanted me to know that a question she had sent to the department had gone unanswered for 5 days, which was unusual, and she was beginning to feel uncertain about the relationship. I sent a kind reply explaining I was no longer with the company and suggested she escalate through Petra's manager. Then I thought about that 5-day gap. The kind of question Rosario would send needed either a rapid response or a transparent explanation of why a longer process was required. Neither had happened. The reason was almost certainly that the person handling her account had not yet learned the difference between questions that can wait and questions that signal something the client needs to feel heard about immediately. That is not in any training document. It comes from years of being wrong and learning from it. Petra had not had those years. Victor had given her responsibilities requiring those years without giving her time to earn them. Operational gaps do not stay small when nobody is watching for them. Something larger was forming, right where I used to stand. By the end of the second week I was hearing things through informal channels. 2 people I had worked with closely sent brief, careful messages. Nothing that violated professional boundaries, but conveying in the oblique language of people still employed there that the situation was not as seamless as Victor had promised. Handoffs were being missed. A client presentation that should have been reviewed before going out had gone without the review, because nobody was certain whose responsibility it was in the new structure. 2 approval processes I had managed were in an ambiguous state where 3 different people each thought someone else was handling them. And there was a larger issue forming around the department's most important client, a firm representing nearly 15% of annual revenue whose account I had personally managed for 8 consecutive years. Their renewal was scheduled for the following month. The preparation process had a specific start date. I knew it because I had run that renewal cycle 8 times. The preparation needed to have started a week before I left. It had not started, because nobody else knew it needed to. That was not Petra's fault. She had not had 8 years of that cycle. She did not know what she was supposed to begin. But it was going to become a problem that no apology could fully resolve. Victor's call came on a Wednesday, 10 days after my last day. I was at my kitchen table working on a consulting project from a former colleague. The work was straightforward and paid decently. More importantly, it was mine. My phone showed Victor's number. I considered not answering. I was not obligated to take his calls. Whatever was happening in the department was the result of his choices, not mine. I answered anyway, because I wanted to hear exactly what he was going to say. His voice had a quality it had not had in any previous conversation, a tightness, like someone working harder than usual to sound calm. Danielle, he said, there are a few client-related items that have come up and I was hoping you might provide some clarity. Clarity. After 12 years reduced to a cost line on a spreadsheet, he wanted clarity. I let a pause sit between us. I'm no longer with the company, Victor, I said. My transition documentation should have everything you need. A pause. Is there someone specific I could recommend for consulting support if you need external help? He said he would think about it. He did not call back. I put my phone down and went back to work. My consulting client's question was more interesting anyway. The anchor client situation clarified for me during the third week. Hugh Bellamy sent me another message. This one was more direct. He had been trying to schedule the renewal preparation meeting that we always held before contract discussions and had received no response from the department. He was beginning to wonder whether the company was still interested in their business. I read that message twice. 8 years of relationship, 12% of the department's annual revenue. And the person responsible for that account was either unaware the preparation meeting existed or unaware it should have been scheduled by now. I composed a careful reply. I told Hugh I had left the company and was sorry he was experiencing difficulty. I gave him the VP's name, Victor's manager, and suggested reaching out there might move things forward faster. I did not tell Hugh what I actually thought. It would have been unprofessional and also unnecessary. The situation was already telling its own story. Then I forwarded my reply to Victor as a professional courtesy with a brief note that Hugh had reached out and I had directed him upward. Victor read the message immediately. I know because the read receipt appeared. He did not respond. That silence told me everything I needed to know about what the next few weeks were going to look like. The renewal crisis was not a single dramatic event. It was a series of smaller failures compounding the way operational failures always do when nobody with sufficient institutional knowledge is catching them early. The preparation meeting was scheduled late. The document that should have been ready wasn't started. The adjusted contract terms Hugh's company expected, reflecting agreements I had negotiated over 2 years and documented in files apparently nobody had located, were missing from the initial draft. Hugh's legal team found the missing terms and sent back a corrections list. That list landed with Petra on a Thursday afternoon. She had not seen the original negotiation history. She did not know which corrections were standard asks and which represented firm requirements. She did not have the relationship depth to have a confident conversation with Hugh about how to move forward. She escalated to Victor. Victor had never been in a single meeting with Hugh Bellamy. He escalated to the VP. The VP, confronting a client risk on the department's most valuable account, began reviewing records. Those records had my name on them. All of them. Every stable process. Every documented agreement. Every piece of institutional knowledge that had kept that relationship intact for 8 years. Sitting in a shared drive that had not been opened. The board-level visibility happened faster than I expected. I learned about it from Wendell, a longtime colleague who had been at the company 15 years and had the kind of senior role that gives a person a clear view of internal turbulence without pulling them directly into it. His message was brief. The VP had initiated a formal review of the department's client management processes. Several people had been asked to produce documentation of recent decisions. He said, with characteristic directness, "Your name keeps coming up in ways that aren't entirely comfortable for Victor." I thanked him and did not ask for more detail. The review was not my doing. I had not contacted anyone on the executive team. I had not spoken to the board or taken any action designed to draw attention to the situation. I had answered messages professionally, directed people to current employees and appropriate escalation paths, and otherwise left the company's internal situation to develop on its own. The truth in organizations has a way of surfacing when the structures that used to manage it are no longer in place. All I had done was stop managing it. The rest had happened on its own schedule, exactly as it was always going to. And it was going to keep happening until someone rebuilt what had been removed. The anchor client paused their renewal. Not cancelled, paused. The professional way of saying the relationship is still alive but confidence in it has been damaged enough that continuing requires a conversation nobody has initiated. Hugh's message to the VP was measured in tone and devastating in content. The department had historically provided exceptional service. Service quality had changed materially in recent weeks. His company needed to understand what had changed before committing to another term. The VP had the call. Victor was on it. He could not answer Hugh's questions because the answers lived in operational history he had never learned. 2 other accounts escalated complaints to the VP's office within the same week. Neither was as large as Hugh's, but together they painted a pattern. The pattern was visible to anyone willing to look at it honestly. The department had functioned at a high level for years. It had stopped at a specific moment in time. The records of that moment were clear. Victor had been in the meeting where he presented his efficiency plan to the VP. He had spoken warmly about the savings. He had presented my salary reduction with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believes they have solved a problem. What he had done was remove the solution to a problem that was about to become very visible to people well above him. The internal review found exactly what the records showed. The VP's team spent 2 weeks examining client communication logs, contract documentation, and operational procedure records. My documentation was central to the findings. Not because I had done anything to insert it, but because 12 years of meticulous record keeping means there is a clear record to find. The client preference files, the process documentation, the escalation histories, the notes from client conversations I had logged for years simply because I knew those notes were the difference between remembering something important and not. The contrast between what had existed before my departure and what existed after was not subtle. The reviewers traced every stable process back to a system I had designed or maintained. They found the transition documentation. They noted it had not been accessed since my departure. They found Victor's reply to my transition summary email. The one that said, "Thanks. Team will review." From what I heard later, that email received a great deal of attention in the review meetings. It had a timestamp. It had a date. It documented, in 5 words, the moment when the person responsible for the department had been given a complete operational roadmap and had chosen not to open it. 5 words. 12 years. The contrast between those 2 things was not subtle either. Victor was called into a meeting with the VP and 2 executive team members on a Monday morning. I know the meeting happened because Wendell told me. I know the general shape of it because a former colleague who attended as a subject matter witness described it carefully, without violating anything he should have kept confidential. Victor arrived with his usual confidence. A presentation ready. The language he always used: strategic alignment, cost optimization, investment in next-generation talent. The VP stopped him early. She had a list of specific questions about specific clients and specific decisions. They required specific answers. Victor did not have specific answers. He had frameworks and vision statements. None of those things were what the VP was asking for. She was asking why the department that had functioned smoothly for nearly a decade had stopped functioning at the exact moment Victor identified its most senior operational employee as unnecessary overhead. She had the documentation in front of her. My documentation, my records, my years of work, now serving less as evidence of what I had contributed and more as evidence of what Victor had not understood when he replaced me. That was the painful irony of the whole situation. The same thoroughness that Victor had once described as excessive was now dismantling his defense, one carefully dated file at a time. Victor's position was eliminated 2 weeks after that meeting. The announcement was framed, as these things always are, in the language of organizational evolution. The company was moving in a new direction. Leadership was grateful for his contributions. I read the internal note Wendell forwarded and felt something that was not satisfaction. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was the particular, bittersweet clarity that comes when you have spent years managing something carefully and then watched what happens when someone who never understood it decides it can run without you. Those 12 years had been real. The work had been real. Its value had always been real. Victor had not been able to see that value because he was looking at the wrong number. He had been looking at my salary. He should have been looking at what my salary was preventing. The anchor client renewed their contract 3 months later. After a new department head came in. After a long confidence rebuilding period that required significant effort to repair. The cost of that repair exceeded the savings from my replacement by an amount that was not close. Victor understood cost. What he never understood was value. Some decisions look smart until the bill arrives. The call I had been waiting for came from a company I had respected for years. It arrived through a mutual contact, a woman named Adaze who ran operations for a consulting firm I had met at an industry conference 3 years earlier. She had heard, through the professional channels that carry this kind of information in every industry, about what had happened at my former employer. The opportunity she described was a director-level role, genuine authority over operations across 3 client verticals, a team of experienced professionals. Compensation reflecting what I actually brought to the position. I asked careful questions and took my time before deciding. But I knew within 20 minutes that this was where I was going. The interview process took 3 weeks. 4 conversations, 2 of which felt like real professional exchanges. They wanted to understand how I thought, what specific operational challenges I had navigated, what I had learned about the relationship between process design and organizational resilience. They did not ask me to justify my salary expectations. When the offer came, the number was what it should have been. I accepted on a Thursday afternoon. I started the following Monday. For the first time in a long time, I walked into a building where my experience was treated as an asset. 8 months later, the department I manage runs the way I have always believed departments can run when people are given real resources and genuine respect. Client retention is above 90%. 2 accounts that came from competitors in my first quarter are expanding their engagements. The team I inherited was competent and underutilized. Giving them proper operational frameworks produced results that show clearly in every report. I think about the 12 years at my former employer sometimes. Not mainly with bitterness, though some bitterness is honest. Mostly I think about what I built there and the clients I genuinely cared about. I think about the morning Victor slid that severance packet across his desk. The certainty in his face. The absolute confidence that he was making a smart decision. He was making a decision. Whether it was smart depends on which number you use to measure it. On the quarterly report for that quarter, Petra cost about half my salary. On the annual report for the following year, the cost of replacing me was measured in client relationships, operational failures, executive time, recovery consulting fees, and the long work of rebuilding confidence in a department that had taken years to stabilize and months to break. Victor understood cost. He never understood value. That distinction cost him everything he had been trying to protect.